I know there's supposed to be a certain degree of fantasy when it comes to musicals, but somehow I doubt that many people would be dancing around in jeans when it's 102 degrees out. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 2021 musical, In the Heights. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all that extra content. In the Heights stars Anthony Ramos, Leslie Grace, and Melissa Barrera, and was directed by John M. Chu. Based on the stage musical of the same name, it tells the story of bodega owner Usnavi, played by Anthony Ramos, as he and his fellow Washington Heights neighbors work towards their dreams. To preface this, I want to tell you something to give you some insight into where I'm coming from with this review, because I think context can be important when applying a review to your own thoughts and mindset. I am not a musical person, at least not live action musicals. I think animated musicals are a little more reasonable, but I have always had a really tough time getting into live action musicals. It's not like I hate them or anything. In fact, there are quite a few that I really enjoy. But there's something about the style and having people randomly break out into song that I always struggle with. So I wanted to mention that right from the start, because I think there are things that I bring up in this review that could be interpreted differently, and maybe more positively, by somebody who really likes musicals. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this isn't an anti-musical review, even though I don't really tend to like musicals. Okay, so with that context in mind, it probably doesn't come as much of a surprise that I wasn't super excited for this movie. I never saw the stage play that this is based on, but I have watched the recorded performance of Hamilton, so between that and the trailers, I had an idea of the general style of this one coming in. And certainly from a stylistic perspective, this movie was exactly what I anticipated it being, a big, exuberant, summery production. The music here features Lin-Manuel Miranda's trademark rapid, rappy conversational style, and I think for the most part, that worked really well. It certainly fit into a modern city setting a little more logically than with the Founding Fathers. And since this is a film, there was a lot more that could be done creatively with regards to the editing and sound design. For instance, right off the bat, there's really cool use of a hose spraying water that acts as percussion leading into the first musical number. Of course, by being a film rather than a stage production, there's this odd disconnect between the performers and the music. It's visibly noticeable at times that they're lip-syncing to their own music, and obviously it makes sense with such a big production and sometimes some very large sets, but it creates this extra layer of separation that, for me, as somebody who already struggles with the disconnect of musicals, pulls me out of the story trying to be told. That said, I did like the music here, as well as most of the musical sequences. None of the songs really stood out and stuck with me on first watch, like many of the Hamilton songs did, but after re-listening to the soundtrack, they've kind of separated into their own distinct things. And I have to say, I was impressed by some of the musical sequences here. There was a good deal of variety to the dances and choreography, and some sequences even mixed in some unexpected fantasy elements. I'm not sure if it was my favorite song, but probably the most impressive sequence was 96,000, with all of its pool choreography. Because I'm not usually too enthralled by the music of musicals, I have a tendency to really focus in on the characters and story and the thematic glue that holds everything together. And I was really pleasantly surprised by that thematic core here. It was easily one of the strongest elements of this film. It tackles a lot of ideas and focuses on a lot of characters. I would say that the main character is Usnavi, and the story's framing device certainly helps solidify that. But the movie broadens its focus pretty quickly, so it's not really a story about an individual, but rather a community and the various individuals within that community. And there's a lot of things going on with the story related to that idea. Everybody within that community has some sort of dream, or sueñito. For Usnavi, it's to move back to the Dominican Republic. For other characters, it ranges from reaching their career goals, to providing a better life for their kids, to making a difference in their community. And I think this movie explores the idea of these personal goals and dreams in a really interesting way, because it shows that they aren't static. People's dreams can change and evolve over time. Sometimes you need the help of others to achieve those dreams, while other times that help could actually be an unintentional detriment. Everybody has their own sueñito, but they don't necessarily all perfectly align with each other's. Even beyond the various individual sueñito plots, I think this movie dives into some really interesting and important themes regarding community. Throughout this film, we really focus on 7 characters, who are all interconnected. But this movie's really about a neighborhood. Right at the beginning, Usnavi narrates that this is a story about a block that was disappearing. And in large part, that is what this story's about. There's definitely a lot of reference to gentrification. And this isn't just a neighborhood of strangers. These people are family, even if they aren't actually related to each other. Even though the community is made up of immigrants from all over, as highlighted by the different flags in the Carnaval del Barrio sequence, they're still part of a communal neighborhood melting pot culture. Now, obviously, I can't speak to this cultural representation on any sort of personal level, so I certainly direct you to some of my Latinx colleagues for more insight into that aspect, but I can at least say that I really appreciated seeing this culture, community, and neighborhood highlighted in a mainstream movie like this. This exploration of and focus on community was really great from a thematic standpoint, but I don't think it was something that was executed particularly well from a story standpoint here. By focusing on so many characters and their individual specific issues, the story ends up feeling spread a bit thin, even though the movie's almost 2.5 hours long. It's one of those things where I completely understand why it was done, but I do think that focusing in on fewer characters would have made the story feel more robust and complete. Because as it stands, we end up with a lot of plot threads that never really get resolved. Usnavi is the only character that we truly follow through to the end, which makes sense because he's technically the main character, but it made things somehow feel unfulfilling. And speaking of the ending, that thing gets dragged out. Maybe people who are more invested in the story than I was won't be bothered by it, but it felt like there were 3 or 4 natural endings that just had another ending tacked onto them. So I went into this movie with no real excitement or expectations, and came out thinking it was okay. In spite of my general feelings on musicals, I didn't dislike this, but I also didn't think it was that great either. It was just fine, but it didn't do anything for me or resonate with me in any way. Now, I realize I'm not the target audience here. Obviously, I'm not Latinx, and I do want to make a point that this isn't a movie only for those culturally represented in the film. I think it has a much, much broader reach than that. But I also think it will resonate much more strongly with those who can find that cultural connection. But beyond that, I think this is a movie for people who have that sense of close-knit community that living in a city can bring. And obviously, being a fan of musicals will likely affect how the film resonates with you too. I was interested in the story and the themes, and was rooting for the characters, but personally, I felt nothing from this film. However, I think that probably says more about me than it does about the movie, because I know a lot of people are having some really emotional responses to the film. So I think this is one of those cases where if it resonates with you, you're gonna really love it, and if it doesn't, it's just gonna be another movie. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number 1 probably isn't much of a surprise considering the genre, but it's gotta be the music and musical numbers. Like I mentioned before, I'm not the biggest fan of musicals, and characters randomly breaking out into song in a live-action movie is always a little silly to me, but that's obviously what this film is, and I think it does a pretty good job with it. Lin-Manuel Miranda's fast, conversational rapping song style is present here again, and I think it works really well with this community-based story, and certainly makes much more sense than having the Founding Fathers rapping. I'll admit that on this first watch, only a few of the songs really stood out to me in the moment, but I have listened to the soundtrack a couple times now, and the songs have started to distinguish themselves from one another a bit more. The second pro has to be the themes. So I thought that the story itself and its execution had some issues, but I really liked everything that was at its core. It kind of had these two interconnected levels. There was the individual level that was really focused on the idea of dreams, the sueñitos. And I thought it was great how it showed how everybody had their own unique dreams and goals, and how those dreams could evolve. On top of that, the movie also had more communal level themes. It wasn't just about one person's dreams, it was about a bunch of dreams. It was about a neighborhood and a community. It was about immigrants. It was about gentrification. And it was about not only trying to retain culture, but to celebrate it. And from those thematic standpoints, I think this movie really succeeded. On the con side, the biggest issue was how dragged out this movie felt. And I think there were two separate things that contributed to this: the pacing and the ending. The pacing was the lesser of the two contributors, but there were several sequences throughout the movie, and not just the musical sequences, that felt overlong for what they were actually contributing to the story. This movie was a tad long, almost 2.5 hours, and I certainly felt the length, but again, musicals aren't really my thing, so I'm sure that contributed a bit. But where I really noticed it the most was the ending. Or endings. This is one of those films that feels like it reaches a natural conclusion 3 or 4 different times, and then just keeps going a little bit more. Probably not a big deal if you're really into the movie, but I gotta say, I was getting pretty burnt out by the end. The second con is related to the story, and is specifically how many unresolved plot threads are left open. So I realize this might sound pretty nitpicky for a musical, but since I personally am never able to just get lost in the magic of a musical, I do tend to focus in on the story and plot. And this movie really put itself in a challenging situation there, because it tries to cover a lot of things and focuses on a lot of characters, perhaps too many. And it's tough, because it's a story about community, so it makes sense that you'd have this broad scope look, and I think it works for the most part, right up until close to the end, because it finishes almost exclusively on Usnavi's story, which would be okay, except during the third act, the film sets up a number of plot threads that don't get any sort of payoff or resolution in any of the film's multiple endings. Probably the most frustrating unresolved ending for me has to do with Sunny, and it just makes that particular plotline feel like it was tacked on at the last minute and never properly integrated into the story. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying In the Heights or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give In the Heights 3 out of 5 paws. It has a decent story and some okay musical numbers, but suffers a bit from pacing issues and an inability to devote enough time to all of the key characters it sets up. I would recommend In the Heights to fans of Lin-Manuel Miranda's work, as well as to fans of musicals in general. The songs here have that snappy, rappy modernity to them that you probably expect from Miranda, so if you enjoyed that in, say, Hamilton, I imagine you'll like this too. And I think people who really like the extravagance and big production of musicals will probably have a really good time with this, especially if you're somebody who lives in a city and can really connect with the core themes of community on a deeper level. If you liked In the Heights, I would recommend Hamilton. So it's technically not a movie, rather a recording of a stage production, but it's available on Disney Plus and is another Lin-Manuel Miranda musical in which he has a much larger performing role. If you want another recent musical about characters working towards their dreams, I would suggest La La Land. I would say that that one's more in a traditional Hollywood musical style, but there are still some thematic similarities. And if you want another movie about New York City communities during a sweltering summer, you should check out Do the Right Thing. It's not a musical, and certainly more intense with its themes, but does a really good job of capturing the vibe and essence of a New York City community. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen In the Heights? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite modern live-action musical? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button, and if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.